Welcome to Build Better with Ace Lab. We're here today with Craig Webb. Craig is president of Webb's Analytics and one of the nation's leading experts on building material dealers and distributors. He spent 12 years as editor-in-chief of Pro Sales, the nation's most honored publication for building material dealers, as well as 5 years as editor-in-chief of Remodeling Magazine. Excited to be with you today, Craig. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So we'll start out with something you're probably pretty used to, a common question out there. What effect did COVID-19 have on building materials in 2020? And related, what do you see as our new normal, in an overused term, but what changes are here to stay?
Well, I suppose you could come back and say it was a combination of shock and awe that we had in 2020. First, the shock that the pandemic had taken place and amid great fears that things were going to close down entirely. People would go out of work. And then the awe at how quickly construction and do-it-yourself work rose to the point where they were busier than they ever were before, at a time in which they were struggling to make sure that they were keeping people safe, but also struggling, and a lot of people don't realize this, probably even worse than COVID was the struggle to find building products and to deal with the rapid price changes. The net results that came out of this, how are dealers different? I believe that dealers first did get far more electronic than they used to. Ideas that they would consider for a long time, they were doing much quicker. So you're starting to see, curbside pickup and delivery was certainly just an easy example of that. But the using of electronic devices like email, even telephone to help make transactions possible were important. A lot of dealers around the country dramatically and very quickly upgraded their websites so that you could find products. A number of them started putting in electronic billing and presentment and online payment. And I think they're, in a sense, the changes that they made were almost the world that they imagined in 2025 that happened 5 years faster than they expected.
You anticipated the next thing I was going to ask you. I've heard estimates that we accelerated 5 to 10 years digitally, and it sounds like that's kind of right in your just about right in your estimate there, that things that would have taken much longer became a necessity.
Yeah, when you're just about to jump off the cliff, sometimes you don't worry that much about whether there's water on the bottom if there's no other choice when you're jumping off the cliff. And I think that was one of the situations. Once they discovered they survived, actually, they said, why didn't we do this all along?
Yeah, I was wondering that, once folks were sort of pushed and needed to do it, are they glad they did? So they did. So that would indicate that, that a lot of these changes are indeed here to stay.
Yes, meetings are different now. Communications are different now. And I don't think, and I think also in a sense it pushed the people who didn't want to have to change to the realization that the world had passed them by and it's time to move on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Craig, tell us about your seminal 2020 deals report. I know you provide a lot of information to the industry and track everything going on there. What were some of the key findings, and how do you expect this year to compare?
Well, it's starting off with much of the speed and vigor that we saw at the end of 2020. So first, it's out of the gate a lot faster than it was in 2020. Mm-hmm. There actually weren't quite as many deals in 2020 as there were the year before, based on the ones that I track. Mm-hmm. I think there were 69 and something on the order of 475 locations were involved. But the deals that were done were much bigger. And of course, the biggest of all, I didn't even refer to as a deal because I couldn't figure out who was buying whom. And that was Builders First Source and BMC,
right?
Which was about 160 yards on the on the BMC side and roughly 300 or so, I think, on the BFS side. Um, but you had that, but you also had the acquisition of US LBM by Bain Capital after several years of talking about whether they were going to try to do an IPO, an initial public offering at US LBM. And then on the specialty dealer side, you had another private equity firm, American Securities, not only buying Foundation Building Materials, which is the #2 company in the country in terms of drywall and steel studs, but then also adding to it about 80 facilities from Beacon, formerly known as Beacon Roofing, now called Beacon Building Products, that specialized in interior
Right,
stuff.
the interior side of Beacon, that's
So,
right.
so what you then had was a company in Foundation Building Materials that's probably about 50% bigger in terms of locations than it used to be. So in a sense, the percentage or the total number of deals was smaller, but I think the overall impact and changes that we're going to be seeing in the future were greater.
Interesting. Let's talk more about those changes, because I think what we've seen in the last several years, and in most of the examples that you just cited, were really consolidation of lumber yards and specialty distributors. A few of the big players are getting bigger and bigger, commanding more market share. What are the benefits that this ultimately brings to contractors and builders, having bigger players service them?
I'm not sure it does.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it does. If it's a very good company, when it combines or it merges, then it's a bigger good company. There is a former editor of Pro Sales, a couple generations before me, named Greg Brooks, who argues that it's hard to find a single example of an independent building material dealer in the United States that got bought and ended up better than it was before. Now, I still think the jury's out on that claim. Let's say if you were a dealer and you got out of roofing because you just couldn't compete anymore, and you get purchased, and the new owner has a way for you to get back into the roofing game. Well, then arguably you are better. Or if they can get you an app, or they can get you a better, healthcare system, there are those kinds of benefits. But if you are a contractor, basically the construction market has a series of almost like swim lanes. You've got the tract builder, you've got the relatively decent sized production builder who's not national. You've got the custom builder, you've got the remodeler, you've got the do-it-yourself customer, and then you've got the person way out in the country who does a little bit of everything. And every single one of those lanes really has almost a specialty dealer that's involved. That's why it was possible in Minneapolis, for example, to have 3 or 4 lumber yards there, and they all were very good lumber yards, and none of them competed with each other because each of them went for a different kind of customer.
Right.
So I'm not sure that ultimately the impact on the contractor is necessarily going to be all that great. I think I mentioned earlier there was a guy who ran who went to a lumber yard in Bradenton, Florida, 65 years ago. Over the course of the next 65 years, the company was bought 6 different times. And it never moved. The location, he drove to the same place every day for 65 years.
New signs every couple of years.
New signs every couple of years, but he was there. And so, for the people in Bradenton, Florida, the construction supply was always Rodney Potter, and didn't matter who he was working for.
Yeah.
It was him who made the difference.
Well, and I guess I would hope, that as, the consolidation, I would think, are going to make dealers, lumber yards more and more sophisticated operationally, and kind of to your point earlier about technology advancements, hopefully that will mean, when you get to the point that you're a multi-billion in sales, like some of them are, I would think the industry's expectations are going to be, they are going to have the, the latest in technology that contractors want, easy to buy from, using artificial intelligence and anticipate your customers' needs, all those good things. Hopefully, as they keep growing, they'll be able to deploy the latest that's very difficult for a fragmented, mom and pop lumber yard to do. Once they're part of one of the big systems you talked about, hopefully they'll bring that advancement.
Well, I think that also implies that the builder will get smarter.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how fast the builder is getting smarter. Something on the order of 1 out of every 8 remodelers with payroll and 1 out of every 9 builders with payroll goes out of business in any given year.
Wow.
And every year, 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 9 builders and remodelers in the business are brand new to the business that year.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, on the construction side, the customer side, you've got this eternal group of kindergartners coming in
mm-hmm.
who don't know how to run a business and are always using the next job to pay for the previous job and the like. So sometimes your bigger problem is not that the dealers lack technology, it's that the customers lack the ability to take advantage of technology. Now, at the same time, there is a whole group of people in there who would, are looking to buy online or looking to do a lot of things. That trend is definitely happening. But what I'm arguing is that it's not a situation where changes are taking place so quickly that dealers are going to die and just be blown by,
Mm-hmm.
if they don't move on. And you also have to think, what does a dealer do that makes them special? Once you start getting into those arguments, then you wonder, well, how much does technology matter versus other things?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's kind of where I was thinking when you started talking about that churn. I think part of the value the best dealers provide is, education, both around products and business acumen, and, teaching R&R contractors how to do their books and how to do a simple marketing campaign. And, they border on technology, but some of them are certainly fall short of that too. So
one of the things I've argued is that just like the hospital in a town is the center for medical excellence in a community, the local lumberyard usually is the center of construction excellence in the community.
mm-hmm.
And so several years ago, when there were some issues about lead paint, for example, that took place, I remember a survey that said, where do you go to get advice about lead paint? And nobody said they went to Home Depot or a big box. Everybody went to the local lumberyard because that
mm-hmm.
was the place that was going to have the answers.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. So what would you say are some best examples of distributors and lumber yards using innovation and technology today? Maybe they're things that they came up with, out of necessity and advancement over the last year, or just maybe folks who have been setting the pace over the last several years with what they're doing.
Well, you do see examples. For example, one roofing company I know is trying to use artificial intelligence to almost do predictive selling. And in some ways, it's the classic "would you like fries with that hamburger?" question.
Yeah.
But also in the case of in the case of roofing, where the material choices tend to be a little bit less varied.
Yeah.
You have a green roof or a brown roof or a pebble roof or whatever. They can look in the records of that customer and see that they bought green shingles the last 10 times they came on. So you can sort of pre-fill pages and do that. There are others that are putting in apps, and one of my favorites actually is sort of like Uber, except instead of the car coming your way, you can see the truck as it motors toward you. And they're getting to be good at that. I remember a lumberyard in Maine that had a wonderful system for when a special order came in and you were processing it. It would automatically send a text to the customer and the salesman and the buyer, and say, this shipment has arrived. It contains these things, as you will remember. We were planning to deliver it on these days, as you will remember. Is that all still what you want to do? And do you want a box of nails with that order? And so it basically speeds up the process. There's a lot of looking right now and asking the question, what is the core job that everybody at the lumberyard does? And if technology figures into the extent of what can technology do to take that particular task away? Classic example from the past years was when dispatch and delivery software came in. You changed from the old days in which, in case anybody who was a customer wanted to know when their order was going to arrive, they'd call the sales rep, who then would call the dispatcher, who then would talk to the sales rep, who would call back the customer. Now, anybody can answer that question, or as the case with the truck, the customer doesn't even have to ask that question. They know when the truck's going to get there.
Yeah, which there is so much just inefficiency, in sort of the ecosystem, in my experience, that, your example earlier about just seeing, where the truck is and when it's going to arrive, maybe doesn't sound that important, but when you've got 4 framers standing there waiting to start on that wall when that lumber truck comes, it becomes mighty important to that contractor. So
yeah, well, once upon a time you used to be able to just bring it out the night before and dump it in the yard, and that's not the way things work anymore. So
no, for sure. So related to that, let's fast forward 10, 15 years. A lot of the current contractors have probably aged out of the system, with the average age in mid to late 50s. We've got some new folks coming up, maybe grew up with, different usage and reliance on technology. What are some of the bigger disruptions you see in the space? Could it potentially look different? Take your crystal ball out, Craig.
A couple of things come to mind, and the first of them involves NASCAR pit stops. Okay. One of the things that I'm seeing around the country is that dealers increasingly are understanding that everything they do has certain processes and protocols, and they are starting to take lessons from manufacturing facilities and look at the time and efficiency issues that were involved in those, and ask themselves, how can I make things more efficient? An example of this is turning around a truck when it comes into the lumberyard. It's made its first delivery, you want to get the second one. The reason I brought up NASCAR pit stops is that once upon a time it took about a minute to change tires and put gas in the car and change the oil and tell the driver what's going on. And in the case of NASCAR, as everybody knows, victory or defeat is measured by the depth of a bumper. So the question became, well, how do we get people in and out of the pit stop faster? Because you don't make money when you're in the pit stop. Right. What Southwest Airlines does is a similar philosophy. Our planes don't make money while they're on the ground. So how do we get them up in the air as much as possible? And so they're starting to go through every single process and ask themselves, how do we make things better? The fact that I brought up manufacturing also is probably the second great trend. Increasingly, construction looks like it will be done more and more in factories whenever possible. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, it's not going to be a major turnover, and we may never be like Germany or Sweden, but we're going to get closer. You had asked earlier about what's the impact of big dealers getting bigger. Big dealers getting bigger have the wherewithal and the capital and everything to get into factory-based construction.
Yes.
And so consequently, that is an increasing thing. But the more factory people you have in your company, the more people you have who say, hey, let's do time and motion studies to figure out how to improve things.
Sure.
So you have that happen. The third has to relates to a video I just heard in which a small builder remodeler in Dallas was being interviewed. And over the course of the 10 minutes of the cut down interview I saw, he must have used the word frictionless 15 times. And so I think that this is in essence what makes Amazon popular. This is in essence what makes a lot of things done. Do it and forget it. It comes to you, you can count on it, when it's going to happen. It's as easy a thing to do as possible. And because those builders frequently are still having trouble, they want to use their day to actually do work, which means they don't even think about ordering or liaising with the construction supply people until nighttime. And of course, nighttime is when the lumberyard's closed.
Yeah.
So you put those things together and you say, how do we have a situation in which we can communicate with them?
Mm-hmm.
So online ordering, online buying, ability to see into whether people have the product, all those things make sense. Fourth thing I'd probably bring up is financial skills. A lot of people who started in the lumber business never got past the back of the envelope and never really thought that much about money and financial management. I think they're getting a lot better at that. And so they're starting to ask themselves, how do I pare away this? How do I take care of that? And how do I analyze data better? We still don't have very many MBAs who run lumber yards. We are getting an increasingly number of owners' kids who are getting business degrees, undergraduate business degrees, which compared with the old days is still a great leap forward. They've heard of a balance sheet now.
Yeah, it feels like there's going to be a lot more efficiency and a lot more impact coming from other industries. A lot of that sort of cross-fertilization, which would make a lot of sense, and at the same time, as we age out and the next cohort moves up, I think their expectations and requirements will be different. Just like during COVID, you talked about companies, and you've talked about it in your in your newsletters, how companies rose to the challenge. And at the same time, in all industries, I think customer expectations came up a lot. We showed we can do it, so it can't go away. Once everyone's vaccinated, people are still going to require it. So it should be very interesting. So so switching gears a little bit, how productively do you feel dealers work with the architect segment right now? What do you think are some of the challenges, and what would be some improvements that we need in the industry there?
Well, I think the first thing we need to stress is that there are very few star architects in the business, and we all tend to think of Frank Lloyd Wright and Zaha Hadid and people like that. Whereas actually the majority of architects in this country are in very small firms, and they often do residential construction, or they're engaged in residential. So let's first break down the relationship between commercial and residential and big and small. I did a survey a number of years ago when I was at ProSales, in which I asked, how often do you talk to an architect? How often do they call on you? And the typical answer was, we get at least, we get contacted, several times a week by architects. And I think the reason why did not have anything to do with building products. It had to do with, once again, that local expertise that the dealer had. They either knew what the building codes were, or they knew what was allowed. They also knew about trends, and they also could help find the product specs. It's my understanding that the Great Recession sliced and diced the architecture industry in very severe ways, and a lot of them lost their support staff. And I think that in some ways the dealer has become the support part of the support team for these small single person, single practice, double practice architects. Now, on the other direction, building product manufacturers often have discovered that the easiest way in a community to get people, architects, to understand their product is to use the dealer as a conduit. Dealer has a room, it's conveniently located. They can help do lunches. They've already got a little bit of a relationship with the customer. So in terms of introducing a new product or helping be a place where you can have your certification training or your retraining all take place, our dealers are serving architects that way. So those two things I think are the most important.
Yeah, nope, that makes sense. Thank you. Lastly, another kind of industry trend that we all watch closely, Craig, and it's around we talked a little bit earlier about the generations, the generations of contractors. Labor availability has been a big challenge well before the pandemic. What's your assessment of the current state of labor availability on both the dealer side and the in the construction job site end?
A couple of things come to mind regarding that. First, well, it sort of reminds me of back in the days of Dobie Gillis. You're too young to remember Dobie Gillis, but he was that was a television show back in the 1950s. And Dobie worked at his father's grocery. And I thought, when I was thinking about that, I was thinking back in the 1950s and early 1960s, you actually saw people on TV who worked in small business. Somebody pointed out that the only small businessman you see today is the guy who runs the store in Sesame Street, the bodega in Sesame Street.
Right.
Everybody else, works for Dunder Mifflin or is a policeman or a doctor or in some giant institution. I do believe that that first, yes, we still are having a major issue with regard to construction. Second, it will continue for two reasons. The first is because we still have in this country an attitude that manual labor and working in a dirty, dusty place by the railroad tracks in the bad part of town is not really a great job. I believe that is changing. I believe that there's been a lot of concern that we haven't had some big national program to get people to understand that manual jobs are okay jobs and you can actually do well. But if you start looking at programs all over the country, it sort of reminds me of the first President Bush's 1,000 points of light. We've actually got 1,000 points of light going on out there. It just takes time to do it. The second reason why it's going to take a long time to do it is that we got to figure out what we want to do in this country with regard to our immigration policy. Frankly, construction supply, and remodeling have historically been jobs that immigrants had. The famous phrase they use over in London is the Polish plumber. All the people doing the plumbing work and keeping London waterworks going apparently were immigrants from Poland who took advantage of, and they were able to do it because they took advantage of the open markets that they had over there. And we don't have those kinds of open markets. So frankly, until we get a lot of our immigration issues set up and start reopening our borders, I think that's going to be a problem too. The third thing that is going to be a factor in terms of our total need has to be, how long will it take for people to start going to factory construction and start doing more component manufacturing and the like? If we do that, there's a lot of advantages. One of them is you tend to get more women in the industry because women are much more willing to work in a factory, especially a nice clean factory, than they are being out in the open where they're, in the cold and being harassed by the men nearby. So I think those things all figure in too. So you put those three things together: immigration, attitude, and manufacturing, and those three I think will be key to determining how quickly we change our ways around here.
Yeah, I understand, and it's a it is a real and systemic issue. I know that we face, and as the average age of the contractor goes up about a year every year, which shows just the lack of pipeline that we have. But
yeah, I sometimes I do have fears about that. I also remember a survey that was done once in which, like 25 years ago, they did a survey of classical music listeners, and they found the average person was 55 years old. They said, "Oh my God! In 25 years, everybody's going to be 80 years old. We're gonna, we won't have any listeners. Their hearing won't even be working." And they did the survey 25 years later, and they found the average age of a listener was 55 years old. So my point is that we may forever have that sort of situation, where it takes a while to get yourself the wherewithal, actually get into a business where you can do this sort of stuff. I do think that, I may be being a little glib about this, but I tend to have a little bit more optimism that the money will rule out. There's the local baseball team here in town was sponsored by a pipe fitters union. And so every baseball game, you were hearing at least 2 or 3 commercials about how you could make more than $100,000 a year as a pipe fitter. That had to have some impact on somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your first point really resonates with me too, that some of it is just turning around the reputation of the jobs. And I think a lot of that comes through awareness, that you can have a very lucrative career if you do the same things you do in your office job, if you work hard and you take some smart risks. And, same holds true here. I do think technology plays a factor too, though. I think part of our unsexy image, is the lack of use, on the job site, and we're seeing more and more of it.
Well, I go back and forth on that. And when you said, technology and these things, I went back to Dobie Gillis. I think if you don't see it on TV, you don't realize it. Actually, it's a little hard. We've got robots on the job site, and looking for things. We've got some very, very smart stuff going on. I just don't think people are aware of, in a sense, how complicated a job it is. The old Le Corbusier line that, a home is a machine for living in, really speaks to how we tend to make more and more complicated machines today.
Well, and I think, to your point earlier, a lot of it is awareness, because you're exactly right. On particularly large commercial construction sites, there's robotics, AR, VR, a lot of really high level safety mechanisms in place, after hours activities that continue after the men and women go home for the day. There really is a lot, but you're right. I guess it's not on TV, so there isn't a lot of awareness. So that's that's all of our charge to keep driving.
Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks that they should get on Robinhood and become a day trader or something like that. But the attitudes need to change. I remember one guy I talked with who was a very successful contractor, and he said, I live on a very nice street in my community, and I live near doctors and lawyers and professionals, and he said, I can tell they sort of look down at me a little bit. He said, but I just sort of remind myself that my truck costs more than their car.
Yeah, well, it's folks do need to understand it's more than just an alternative to college. It's a very viable career path. So,
or really both, go to college and then, come out of it. Some of the most successful remodelers and other people I've met out there were former English majors.
Yeah, fair enough. So, well, Craig, thanks so much. Always great to speak with you and get your insights on the industry, and look forward to your publications and work in the year ahead.
Thank you very much.
All right, enjoy the week. Bye now.
Right, bye-bye.